We'll get stuck into question 3, and this one is all about jobs. Whether it be a business or community forum, in any discussion, it's long been agreed that the Central Coast simply does not have enough jobs to support the number of working residents. 2 facts to support this is the excessive number of residents that have to travel to Sydney and Newcastle to find a career, and the statistic that the Central Coast does not want to be known for, our high youth unemployment figures. To have such a high commuter population only contributes to money leaking out of the Central Coast economy through outside spending, and youth unemployment has a raft of associated issues that extend further to the social problems that go hand in hand with high unemployment. The business community has a right or has an opportunity to play a significant role in bringing back the skills and dollars of our commuter residents. Equally so, business can play a role in the reduction of youth unemployment figures whilst training and mentoring our next generation of business leaders for the Central Coast. However, backed up by the overwhelming feedback, business is simply finding it too difficult to create more employment due to the lack of flexibility and over-regulated industrial relations framework that governs employment in our country. One size does not fit all. To create jobs, we need a system that is truly modernised, speaks of productivity and flexibility. We'll now ask each party to respond on their ideas and commitment to jobs for the Central Coast by making it easier to employ people. And this time in order, we're going to go with Deb first.
Can I open with a remark about productivity? Productivity matters. Productivity on the Central Coast as we move forward will be absolutely underpinned by the NBN. And the reality is that productivity growth during the period of this government is almost 3 times that experienced under the former government. So productivity absolutely matters, and it's good that we have got some runs on the board, but we can always do more. One of the things that concerns me in the conversation about jobs is how often the issue of youth unemployment is the issue that gathers people's attention first. Certainly, there are many young people who'd like to be working on the Central Coast, and certainly I'm concerned that so many of our population have to go to Sydney. That's why we need the transformative capacity of the NBN to liberate a much richer and more diverse economy here on the coast. But in terms of getting some facts on the record, lest we become so hopeless in our discussion, so fearful and so negative about youth unemployment in our area, that we actually breed a sense of hopelessness into the young. The reality is state figures of 15 to 24-year-old total unemployment rate for New South Wales as of June this year was 10.6%. That's the state figure. For our region, Gosford-Wyong, it's 11.5%. Yes, it's concerning that 11.5% of young people aged 15 to 24 are seeking employment and unemployed. But we need to be mindful that at 10.6% in Sydney, this region perhaps isn't quite so tragically awful as we often try to convince ourselves. And I say that as a former teacher who spent so many of my years with young people, because the way that businesses speak has incredible power for young people, and we need to encourage them to think that they do have a right to a job on the coast and that we're committed to making sure that we provide them with that. Now, one of the things that has absolutely enabled the steady decline of unemployment in that youth group in particular is the impact of skills training and participation programs by the federal government. We have invested in a way that has created an incredible multiplier effect to ensure that young people are able to participate in the training that they need. When we look at the figures, particularly for 15 to 19-year-olds, we see a higher level of unemployment. And that's why it's so critical that we secure their interest and that we provide opportunities for them to engage in learning. Investing in trade training centres on the Central Coast has really helped our young people who might have fallen out of school keep engaged, and that prepares them for employment. Partnerships with local companies such as Baltimore Air Coil, with a young student by the name of Justin Swan coming out of the St Edward's Metal Trades Training Centre, is a great example of how we help kids make that transition from school through training and into work. We do, across the country, have indeed record numbers of apprentices and trainees. Almost 494,000 people undertook apprenticeships and traineeships in the recent period, up from 418,000. And with this increase of 18.2% on a regular basis continues, vet fee help is helping young people access the sorts of learning that they would like to do to help them become work ready. The My Skills website has radically improved the transparency of vocational education in the training sector, and across the country has provided information on over 4,700 training providers and over 3,250 training courses to connect students and employers with training organisations that best suit their needs. We've also invested in skills and apprenticeship support. Participation matters to this government, and what we would like to continue to do is to work on workforce packages that will ensure continuing investment in skills in conversation with the business sector. I know how young people can leave school thinking that they're ready for work, and the gap between where they are and where work requires them to be is something that is constantly being bridged and needs to continue to be so. We are intending to invest $558 million to deliver around 130,000 quality training places tailored to meet the different needs of different industries, and particularly in different regions through the National Workforce Development Fund. Obviously, we want to continue our investments to improve the apprenticeship scheme with $200 million to assist apprentices to progress and complete their training in a more timely way, and $1.75 billion to partner with the states and territories on ambitious reform of the vocational education and training system. $263 million to deliver core skills and to open up new opportunities. Of course, to keep our economy resilient, we need to continue to train. We need to work with business to ensure that we can generate people ready for jobs, and jobs will grow with the capacity of those young people and their skill development.
Thanks, Deb. Up next to talk about jobs, that very big question from the Liberal Party, it's Lucy Wicks. Was it? Oh, you tricked me. Okay. McNamara.
Growing the Central Coast economy and providing jobs close to where people live is a key priority for the Coalition. To support local job creation, we understand the need to support key regional industries and local businesses to enable them to grow, and to source and encourage opportunities by encouraging businesses to expand or establish in the region. We will support the need to attract new businesses by encouraging vibrant and growing centres. And we recognise the need for new centres such as the Warnervale Town Centre, which will provide new business opportunities, local jobs and housing for the region's growing population. And we recognise the revitalisation of the Entrance Town Centre to attract more business and provide more local job opportunities. And we will encourage and support the development of the Central Coast as a choice tourism and event destination through fighting for projects such as the Tuggerah Sports Precinct and the development of a tourism hub at the entrance. And as your local Liberal candidates, Lucy and I acknowledge the numerous government strategy papers and plans aspiring to see the Central Coast region prosper. We recognise the importance of these documents and support many of their initiatives and local strategies, including the importance in planning for future skills. We acknowledge and support providing mechanisms to engage young people in education and help their transition into further education and employment, and partnering with businesses and training providers to develop quality training options linked to employment opportunities. The provision of a skills centre in Dobell is close to my heart, and it's a project that I have fought for since becoming a candidate 16 months ago. And I will continue to champion this important facility and ensure that the needs of our youth are met through the provision of a quality training centre. And I'm talking about these projects federally, and I'm talking about these projects locally. These are game changers for the Central Coast. We need to demonstrate that we can be innovative and we can create these job opportunities. We can't rely on government to deliver jobs, and that's why I'm fighting for these projects that have come from our community. And the reason I'm passionate about these is because I know the Central Coast community is behind them and they will create jobs. Growing the Central Coast economy and providing jobs is a key priority. But how do we sustain our economy, and how do we encourage growth and productivity? Well, government can't achieve this by themselves, but the Coalition recognises the role we can play in improving the frameworks, including the regulatory, the taxation and the industrial relation frameworks in which business operates. As highlighted previously, one of the most important things we can do is to reduce regulation. On industrial relations, we want to ensure that small business can adapt their business needs to meet their employment needs. The Coalition understands the need to protect jobs, and we believe in reward for effort. We also understand the need to have healthy businesses to employ more people and pay better wages. And there's been many calls for changes in the laws from unions and employers alike. Our improvements to the Fair Work Act are based on providing common sense solutions to practical industrial relations problems that currently exist. We can say to workers, your pay and conditions will be safer under the Coalition. If elected, one of our first actions will be to abolish the carbon tax. The reason being, because this tax is impacting on the capacity of business to grow. And I know from my own experiences here in Dobell, from speaking to small business owners, this is a toxic tax. We need to put this into perspective as to why it is so important to abolish the carbon tax. It's the small businesses that are wearing the brunt of this tax. Businesses that use refrigeration, the publican at North Wyong paying an additional $20,000 a year for electricity and gas, who tells me, Karen, I would have loved to employ some more people, but I can't afford to. Businesses such as the local butcher, the bottle shop, the greengrocer, the smash repairer, the baker, these are local businesses that employ local people. Julia Gillard's carbon tax was a $64 billion tax costing Australians jobs. Kevin Rudd's carbon tax is a $58 billion tax, and it's already costing Australians jobs. On the government's own figures, the carbon tax will increase sixfold between mid-2014 and mid-2019. We simply can't afford it. If we want small business to prosper, and if we want businesses to have a viable future here on the Central Coast, and if we want small business to create jobs, we must get rid of the carbon tax. We are the only party that will abolish the tax. And our changes are aimed at making small business more competitive, more productive and more innovative. And that's why we have a particular focus on small business within the Coalition, and in recognising the importance of small business, the Minister for Small Business will have full cabinet status. Thank you.
Okay, Craig is up last. 5 minutes to tell us all about jobs in Dobell.
Ladies and gentlemen, the key factor in terms of jobs is about productivity, and Australia has an interesting story to tell about that. Productivity in Australia grew in the 80s and the 90s, the early 90s, and it came from reforming government, and some may say the low fruit, but the difficult fruit that no one had actually picked before in floating the dollar, modernising the Australian economy, bringing it onto the world stage. And we saw a surge in productivity across the country, and there was a boom in terms of that. From the late 90s, for the next 10 years in Australia, productivity stagnated. And one of the reasons it stagnated was because government wasn't prepared to do some very hard yards in terms of where the next productivity boom is. The last 2 years, we've seen productivity pick up again in Australia. So 10 years of not much happening, the last 2 years it's picked up. And the reason is because every economist will tell you around the world that the next area of making sure that a country, an advanced country like Australia, increases the size of its pie, increases its productivity, is investment in human capital, investment in education, investment in training, making sure that we get people better trained for better jobs. There are two problems with jobs on the Central Coast. One, there's not enough of them, and two, they're not the right sort of jobs that people want to have here. That's why they travel down to Sydney, not necessarily because they can't find a job, but the better paying jobs, the better skilled jobs are down in Sydney or up in Newcastle. So we need to look at how we frame our economy here on the Central Coast and match that to the Australian economy and the sorts of changes that we need to do. The big thing is making sure we don't go back to what happened under the Howard days when investment in education was one of the lowest in the OECD. We need to be making sure we continue on pushing investment in training and education right across the board. Now, I was glad that Karen acknowledged my election promise from 2010 in terms of a skills centre. That is part of it, but it's only a very small part of it. The investment in terms of schools, the Gonski report, I think we're calling it something else now, is also equally important. So is universities. $60 million to the Central Coast campus of the University of Newcastle in the last 3 years is important. What we need to be doing, though, is making sure this is consistent. One of the difficulties government has is the old thimble and pea trick, and we have seen it a little bit with both governments. We've seen it a little bit with Labor of recent times. If we're going to invest in education, we shouldn't be cutting the education projected budget for higher education, which is what Labor recently did. We need to be making sure that we're looking at world's best practice in terms of the way in which we invest in jobs, good jobs, and making sure that people are properly trained so that they can take up these good jobs and industries are encouraged here on the Central Coast. Now, here also, Deb O'Neill's summary of unemployment was very important because it is the factual situation. What we've seen on the Central Coast is going into the global financial crisis, unemployment, both youth unemployment, teenage unemployment and general unemployment, used to run 2 to 3% above the state or national unemployment rate. Since the GFC, it's been consistently around 1.5 to 2%, so it's been significantly lower. Part of that was because the GFC, if you were going to target it for any area, it was specifically targeted for the Central Coast. Investment in retail spending and investment in trades and trade training and those sorts of things. So that brought the Central Coast back into the game. What we need to do with the next phase is make sure we invest in our people so that they're able to take up the new skills and the new sorts of jobs. Industrial relations always gets thrown up as an issue that's there, and look, if you want to employ people on $3 an hour and have no health and safety issues, then offshore everything. But I mean, that's not the sort of society that we want. So there are going to be rules and legislation, and we saw what happened under the Howard government when they went too far with work choices. So how do you get a balance in terms of that? Well, the issue that is most raised with me in terms of small business is unfair dismissals and how you deal with those as a small business, the cost, the time that you have to do. And often people say, well, look, I'd rather pay the person a few $1,000s so they go away and don't have to contest the issue. I wrote something about 10 years ago in terms of this, and what I proposed then and what I think is equally as important now is that small business in the first instance shouldn't need to appear before any tribunal until at least a prima facie case has been made out that there is something genuine about that unfair dismissal. Keep the employer out of it. You save enormous costs for the employer. If the employee is then able to establish that prima facie case, then you proceed in relation to those issues. It's a simple change, but it would mean something like 90% of unfair dismissals that bug small business would no longer exist. I know I'm over time, but there's only one other thing I do need to say, and this is probably something that doesn't necessarily thrill small business, but it was something that I was very keen to vote on in Parliament, and that's the changes to 457 visas. We do live in an area that has some challenges in terms of unemployment. One of the recent changes that was made to 457 visas was to make sure that local jobs are advertised locally first before visas are given to overseas people coming in to take those jobs. This is a regulation, but I think it's a good one and an important one to make sure that our area does everything it can to make sure our kids get jobs.